The second part. This is the 7-step process. So the following is a 7-step process on how people became not just rich or super rich, but ultra super rich, and far more importantly, caused massive, arguably unnecessary suffering for billions of humans worldwide. So what is the Fed? In short, it's a hybrid organization, being both a private organization, as it's owned by private banks, as we will explore, and a government organization, as the government is involved in setting up the laws and maintaining them. In some sense, it is neither, and in another sense, it's sort of both. But to understand even this more fully, we need to both understand the creation of money and some essential mechanisms of our present-day governing system. So I'm not an economist, and I have done my own didactic study, I suppose, so my presentation of economics is rather simplistic in some ways. Nevertheless, I'll leave it to your judgment, but I think I've fleshed out the basics of this sort of lower right or interobjective system. If you want more detail, I suggest you go to Max Kaiser or G. Edward Griffin as 2 examples to flesh these ideas out for you. So the 7-step process to bailout. Number 1, the bank makes money out of nothing, which needs to be elaborated, and we'll get back to it. G. Edward Griffin calls this the Mandrake mechanism. Number 2, banks lend out this made-up money to derive profits. Griffin explains that when we use fiat currency and we deficit spend, then inflation is the hidden tax. In his own words, since fiat currency has nothing of tangible value to offset it, government's purchasing power can be obtained only by subtracting it from somewhere else. It is in fact collected from us in a decline in our purchasing power. It is therefore exactly the same tax, but one that is hidden from view, silent in operation, and little understood by the taxpayers. End quote. This kind of fiat system, like the one we are presently under, is more dreadful for the very poor and thrifty because of the lack of resources and the quick spending of those with a lot of fiat, and the rich and powerful altering the nature of the markets to suit their own ends. This hidden inflation can increase quickly, and has in many third world countries in particular, and arguably almost certainly will happen in the first world country due to the derivatives that we're holding right now. So deflating the value of the fiat in hand for those that have been holding it, the thrifty, and those lacking enough resources to buy proper assets are left worse off, or the poor, as the little they have is now even worth less. So number 3, loans are then made. However, especially in the small banks, these loans tend to be rather conservative, so as not to go insolvent, or as we call it, bankrupt, as they don't have a huge buffer zone, and their insolvency won't have much of an effect on the entire system. So there's no bailout for these smaller banks. But under the FDIC, it does not, and I quote, "It does not pay to be cautious. The banks making reckless loans earn a higher rate of interest than those making conservative loans, and thus tend to be responsible." Unquote. The Federal Reserve System within FDIC and FDLC, quote, "now guarantee that massive loans made to large corporations and other governments will not be allowed to fall entirely upon the bank's owners. Should these loans go default from the bigger banks, this is done under the argument that if these corporations or banks are allowed to fail, the nation would suffer from vast unemployment and economic distribution." So people are going to lose their jobs. There's not going to be any economic growth because of the destruction of these banks. These banks don't have to be cautious, therefore, and with the bigger loans, the government will intervene oftentimes if a corporation defaults on the loan. It is the very cosmic size of these loans that get the public to bail out the system. That is in fact how the ploy is perpetuated. The banks make the money off the interest of the loans, so lingering loans that take years to get paid off are desired by these banks. Governments take this to a whole new level as the process of rolling the debt or rather continuous profit off interest occurs, as banks never expect these governments to pay off their debts, in turn providing huge profits to the banks continuously, as it is so seldom that governments do in fact pay off their debts, especially as we get later and later into this ploy. because the debts have been rolling continuously. Number 4, at some point the people, corporations, governments to which many of these bigger loans are lent out cannot even pay the interest on the loans, at which point the banks create additional money, returning to step 1. The banks then lend this money to the borrower so they can continue to pay off the interest. This interest is on the old loan plus a new additional loan. Number 5, the borrowers get tired of working towards only paying off the interest of the old loans, at which point banks can make still more money, allowing the borrower to spend their money on something other than interest. And number 6, the borrower is sinking very deep into debt at this point. Rescheduling can only occur at this point for the loans, which allows for lower interest plus longer payment times. This tends to extend the day of reckoning further into the future, but actually makes it even more probable than before that the day of reckoning will arise. Although, as we'll see in number 7, step 7, this has already been built into the 7-step process. So number 7, at one point the day of reckoning occurs, at which point the borrower denies giving payment of the interest on their loan, but instead of being absorbed, and perhaps largely because of huge losses of stakeholders after the absorption process, gigantic loans tend to continue. But the bigger reason not to absorb these larger loans goes as follows: as being beneficial to the public, as it could hurt the country's people and the world situation at large. Again, it's sort of that number 4. And since we are now so dependent, our efforts will drop, foreign capital will drop, and foreign capital will dry up greatly. And that was a little quote. I argued that the spend the borrower. This point, usually a small almost is written or seen from the beginning. The whole process is essentially continuing in this matter worldwide with slight variations. In other words, the 7-step process is a stern repeat process pre-designed for global centralization of money, power, and intimacy, even information. That was it pretty summed up, so it might sound more complicated than I think it actually is, using some of the technical jargon, but in some sense it's pretty simple. In another sense, I mean, it's not super simple, but it's relatively simple, I think. I will read some more. I might as well just go through all of it, do it in about 5 or 6 parts here. So I'll just stop it at this point and pick it up in the next section here.